It's time for another episode of the audio project with Dina Tierney. And today's episode is part of our athlete series, which I love. And today we have an impressive athlete on the podcast, has an amazing career, and I can't wait to dive in and learn more from him. His name is Michael Dowsett, Australian rugby player. Michael, thank you for joining me on the podcast today.
Thank you for inviting me. I appreciate it.
Yeah. And I know we met each other at Cub, but if you don't mind, maybe can you give us like a short 411 on, or I guess maybe 411 doesn't make sense in Australia. Over here, that means information, quick information. So a quick short thing on who you are, a little bit of background on yourself.
Yeah, absolutely. So currently and very much retired former professional rugby player. Now kind of, I guess, getting set in the world of business and I've really enjoyed my first 2 years since retiring and in doing so. So obviously landed at Cub originally, which obviously had our two paths meet, but now sitting in a role in the financial services industry, working for a company called Westbrook Capital that I really enjoy, and everything's been a bit of a steep learning curve, certainly different rather from the days of playing professional rugby, but I think I'm sure we'll talk about it in a bit more detail, but certainly a lot of similarities between the two.
Yeah, very cool. Well, it's good that you mentioned, so professional rugby player now turned into a professional corporate type job. It's funny that you say that, because when I was looking at some pictures of you when you were playing rugby, you have this very like game face on. And then when I met you, it was through Cub. And so I saw your LinkedIn picture first before I saw rugby pictures. And I was like, you have your smile on, you have a different look, but man, when I see you in the jersey, definitely a game face look. So I thought that was really cool.
Pretty far removed how you would look running out to play a rugby game versus how you're going into a meeting or a boardroom trying to I guess make sense from a business point of view. But I guess they are similar in their own ways.
It's a different game face. Yeah, one was a little more intimidating. The other one was more smiles.
Yeah, exactly right.
So let's dive into kind of starting off as an athlete. If you don't mind, I'd love to just hear. I always love when I talk to an athlete to learn how they got started. And so what about you? How did you get started with rugby? How did you find that passion? And maybe who were some key people in your life at that time?
Yeah, absolutely. So I think I was a 6 or 7 year old. I can't really remember the exact date, but when I first played or first got interested in the sports, I kind of went to dad. Dad had played first grade rugby league. Mum was a competitive runner, so that kind of sporting pedigree, I guess, existed prior to myself. And I asked Dad, could I play rugby? Could I play at the local club? And eventually, kind of, he caved in and let me do it. So I started out kind of 6 to 7 years old down at my local rugby club. I think I was very lucky. I was one of those people that got to say, how many times do you ask someone, are you exactly what you wanted to be? When you grew up, and for me, that's something that I hold very dear to me. I always wanted to play professional rugby, and I was incredibly lucky to have had the career I did. So that's very much how I started. But in terms of the people that I guess influenced me, mum and dad obviously at the forefront of that, and they certainly did. They provided every opportunity for me to go and have the career that I did. But I think in terms of people, I guess there's a few, and maybe we'll dive into that later. But I was very lucky that during the time where I first started playing professional footy, the guys that were Australia in general was they very much had a stronghold on the world rugby scene. So the Brumbies were probably who I eventually went and played for. Kind of won the biggest domestic competition, so the equivalent of an NBA or an NFL. They were the best kind of domestic team in the world, and Australia, the Wallabies were actually the world champions. So the two guys that were really at the forefront of that were Steve Larkham and George Gregan, and they were very much my idols. And ironically enough, were eventually my first ever coaches in that kind of professional setting. So it's kind of embarrassing to say, and the boys kind of gave me shit about it eventually when I went down to the Brumbies. My wall had framed pictures of George and Steve up on the wall, and then eventually those guys are my first mentors or role models in that professional setting, it's like, you can't really script that. So it was incredibly cool.
Yeah, it's like a dream come true. Do you feel like, so starting at 6-ish years old, so probably starting with your dad, watching him play, is that how you went to some games, saw your own father play, and that's how you got introduced, and then you just started playing for the club, for different
I
clubs?
never saw him actually play, but
Oh,
I certainly heard about it at every opportunity that possibly could. So Dad likes to run the story that, I got to play professionally, but he could have, and he was way tougher than me. And if he ever saw me, he would have belted me and all this sort of stuff. And I was just like, well, you didn't play professionally, I did. So unfortunately, we never got to play against each other. But yeah, he kind of, he put me in that frame of mind of being a competitive, aspirational kind of person. Because maybe if he was, if he got the sort of parents I did, then maybe he would have got the chance to play professionally as well. So I never saw him, but I certainly looked up to him on my own way. That's for sure.
gotcha. Okay, cool. I think part of it is also at a young age, hearing about things. There's a lot of children that have dreams. And at what point did you really go, this is what I want to be? How old were you by that point?
I think the 2003 World Cup would have been so how old was I then? I was probably 10 or 11. Like that was when we actually lost the final. To anyone that's listening that's Australian will understand that, we lost in overtime to an English guy that kicked a drop kick to beat us in the World Cup final on Australian soil. That for me, I remember like crying like a family member or someone who just died. Like it crushed me. But I remember after watching that, it was like, rugby was who I was. It was who I was going to be. That was like, it was ingrained in me. That was, and whether, I don't know whether at that such a young age, if other people feel the same, but for me, it was like, watching those guys, like I mentioned, Steve and George earlier, like watching those guys perform on such a big stage from an Australian standpoint, it was incredibly inspiring. That was really the moment for me.
That's cool. And the reason I say it is, look, there's a lot of people that I think want to go. I mean, you're a kid. Yes, there are a lot of kids, by the way, that do have dreams at age 10 and 11, but they can't reach it, for a number of reasons, right? Whether it's work ethic and a combination of talent and all the other attributes. So really what I wanted to turn to next was, what did your journey to pro look like for you? How did you say, oh, wow, I see this, inspirational moment. I'm feeling like this is what I want to do at such a young age. What did the journey look like? There's a lot of people that wish they could do the things that you've accomplished. So if you could share your journey.
Yeah, I think, throughout that entire game, I was probably sitting there with, holding a rugby ball. So there was no specific training regimen or like anything that took place. It was just more, particularly at that age where strength and conditioning is not really it's something that you factor into who you are. Like for me, I was just always the kid that walked around with a rugby ball in his hand. So I think, like anything, if you do it a lot, you're going to become fairly autonomous at it. So whether it be throwing the ball at dad at a young age, whether it be walking around the weekend just holding the ball itself, I just I almost had this strange, from a young age, like addiction or obsession to it. So I think that very much provided the framework for me to be able to go on and do what I did.
Very cool. Well, it's really impressive to reach that pro level. One of the things that I like to talk about, and I know you've mentioned too, is putting in the time, putting in the effort, the work ethic, and I think the importance of practice, and that time is really that practice thing. Like you just said, as simple as just touching the ball and getting, feeling one with it, right? It's just so natural. It becomes natural the more you practice, the more you play.
Yeah.
And I play that. I mention it because in our day-to-day jobs here, we do Salesforce consulting, nothing like as cool as being a professional rugby player. But I encourage people that the practice is really where you're going to gain what you need to. And some people aren't willing to put that in if you're wanting to get to that next level. So curious, like, how do you feel yourself as an athlete approached practice training and kind of continuing to reach those levels?
Yeah, I think it wasn't until I reached high school, so like 12, 13, where I was a little bit more intentional about how I went about things. So for me, I think I mentioned to when we first met, I was one of those kids when I was younger. I was kind of bigger. I was more athletic, and then I went through a phase of like 4 or 5 years where I just didn't grow. Like puberty just wasn't on my side. So not that that was the kind of motivation to do what I did, but I think I quite liked or enjoyed the fact that from 12, I think from 12, 13 years old, I wanted to be quite intentional about how I went about things. So I can't remember where I saw it, whether it was someone that told me or whether I read it. It was that you needed to do 10,000 hours of practice to be considered an expert at a certain skill. So for me, I was sitting there in my room. I was like, okay, how does 10,000 hours look from a schedule standpoint? And for me, it was just 300 passes a day, 150 on your left, 150 on your right. And I guess if anyone that doesn't understand the context of that from the position I played in rugby, that the passing of the ball was your primary concern. It was your role. For you to be good at your position, you had to be incredibly good at that particular skill. So 150 passes took on average 35 to 45 minutes. So every single day, regardless, that's what I did. Rain, hail, shine, felt sick, exams at school. Probably should have focused more on those, but doesn't matter. Like I was very much like, whether it's a wall blocking the ball and coming back to me, or there was someone catching it and throwing it back, that happened no matter what. 150 passes each side per day. So by the time, if you do that at 12, 13, by the time you're 18, regardless of whether you've grown, regardless of whether you're athletic yet, the guys that haven't done 150 passes per day, and I guarantee you most guys weren't, they were probably doing less. You had no chance without sounding arrogant. You had no chance of having a pass the way I had. So it was almost a numbers game. And we kind of touched on, Kobe Bryant and Michael Jordan's work ethic when we first spoke. Those guys were doing things that most people thought they were doing, but were you actually doing it? Has your practice regime actually reflected what you're doing on the field? Like for me, it did, because I was willing to put in the hours or the minutes or whatever it took.
Yeah, that makes sense. I'm a huge fan. I was telling my team that, Kobe was talking about showing up early, way before everybody else. By the time it's 4 or 5 a.m., like he's already put in, I mean, he's ahead of you, and those hours start to add up, and all of a sudden nobody can catch you at a certain point. So I think that is definitely, a really, really important point for anybody. It's weird now too, and I guess it's more talked about, I guess, is this balance and work-life balance. There's nothing wrong with that, and I completely agree with it. But it's interesting how there's sometimes a villainizing those that put in work and commitment towards something. But I feel like if that's what you're trying to achieve a goal, right, then how else are you going to get ahead?
I couldn't agree more. I think that's a very good point.
Mm-hmm. So you talked about scrum-half a little bit, or you were starting to talk about your position. It's really cool that you took on that position. I was curious, can you talk a little bit more about, it's such a tough position. You're right in the middle of it all. You have to make some quick decisions. The team's extremely dependent upon you. What do you love about this position? And how did you even choose that? Did it just happen, I guess?
It's funny because I remember I was always like a fly half or a center. Like I liked having lots of space around me. Your ability to kind of express yourself in open space was something that really appealed to me about rugby. And it wasn't until, again, around that age, like 10, 11, our halfback in the kind of A's team within our age group. So it's like 10 A's, B's, C's, D's. So I was playing 10 A's, and our halfback got injured, and it kind of, the responsibility fell onto the next smallest person, which was me in the back line. And they were like, you're gonna have to play halfback this week. And I remember at the time I was like, oh, like, are you kidding? Like, I do not want to play this position. You've got no space around you. Like, you don't get to have any influence on the game. But I think I was obviously being that young, you're very naive. Like, what I loved about halfback was you can play those other positions, which is great, but you might touch the ball 10, 15, 20 times in a game. Like playing scrum half, you're touching the ball 80 plus times. So your ability to inject yourself on that game, your ability to directly influence that game is it's timesing by 4. So, whether you like to admit it or not, you're automatically a leader. So from a defensive standpoint, you're kind of like that puppeteer. You're moving guys into position defensively. In attack, your ability to control the game is so important. So I think I liked, how much, there's a lot of power, but a lot of responsibility came with it. So you kind of indirectly one of the main leaders in the team, and whether I would have been naturally if I played center or fullback or something, or whether it was just something that came to me from playing that position. But I always felt like I had a bit of a leadership role or a bit of an influence over, the teams that I got to play with.
Yeah, and I love that you brought up leadership, because I think, I always get a lot of questions about leadership. And I think those that play in the field, there's quick decisions that have to be made. The team is very dependent upon you to play your position and play it well, or pick up the slack if needed, right? If there's kind of a moment there. How do you, how would you define your leadership style when you play rugby?
I think I remember going down to the Brumbies. So to give context, like the Brumbies were a team that just got beaten in the grand final the year before I came down. So when I came down, it was like the guys were there were kind of in the frame of mind whether it was win now or don't win. Like that kind of premiership window, you call it, it was closing. So, the guys that were playing, 13 to 14 of the starting 15 were guys representing their country. And all of a sudden I was this young kid coming down. I was realistically, the second string halfback. The guy that was playing, the guy that was starting was incredible and taught me a lot. But he was so distinct and direct in his direct, like he was do this, do that. And these guys listened. But if he wasn't on the field and I was, it was almost like that, that responsibility falls on your shoulders. So all of a sudden you're talking to guys that you've watched on TV or that you look up to, and you're trying to order them around and whatnot. So that initially took a lot of getting used to, the ability to tell guys that are far more experienced than you, far better at rugby than you realistically, to where to go, what to do. I took probably a year or two to actually kind of adopt that, do what you're told mentality in terms of being a leader, in terms of playing my position. But as the years went on, I quite enjoyed that. So I think having played under a lot of really, really good leaders, guys that have, captained Australia, guys that have captained England, guys that have actually captained Japan. So I was probably lucky in that my career, went overseas and I was exposed to so many different leadership styles. I think you can be kind of one of two things. You can either be someone that, and I've seen it done well and I've seen it done poorly. I think you can be someone that kind of throws your arm around someone, plays the kind of sympathy or empathy card, and kind of get someone up to speed by doing it that way. Or you can be someone that, kind of lights the competitive fire or presses the right button underneath someone. And I think, very young in my career, I was someone that responded to having the arm thrown around me, telling me everything was going to be okay. But as my career progressed, I very much responded to whether it be a coach picking someone else instead of me in training, or whether it be, that kind of, you speak like from a basketball standpoint, you talk about that time where, Michael Jordan punches Steve Kerr in the head because Phil Jackson starts giving him all the calls. It's like he kind of stoked that fire underneath MJ, and then he responded in that way. I think I really responded to having that competitive fire lit under me, so that kind of almost adopted into my natural leadership style, if that makes sense.
No,
might not have always worked. That's kind of what I did.
Well, I mean, I think that's how you learn it too. And I think you're right. Like as a leader, it depends on who you're talking to. It depends on your team and, what the circumstances are. I binge watched Last Dance and I was like, oh my God, This is amazing. And even seeing his career and sort of his style change of leadership, I think we all do, right? You learn from different experiences. You see the good, the bad. And you've had an incredible diverse range of things that you were able to see, playing for the English team and Japanese team too, which is pretty incredible. When you look back on that, and the experiences that you had, are there any like really memorable and high point moments in your professional rugby career?
Yeah, that's a good question. I think The two most memorable moments would be probably my starting debut. So when I got picked to actually start, and the guy I spoke about, Nick, who was one of the best halfbacks in the world, I sat on the bench for the game. So we played. The team that actually won the competition that year, but it was on Anzac Day, which for those that I guess don't know that are listening, it's like a Memorial Day for people that have fought in either Australian or New Zealand forces within the war. So my granddad actually did that. So he'd actually recently passed away. We played a game in Canberra against, like I said, the eventual champions, the Highlanders. So it was my first start. My parents were down to watch it. We actually won, and it was a game where everything was just kind of. I'm sure we'll touch on it. I didn't need to worry about anything other than my role, and I kind of, I did that, and the outcome kind of took care of itself, and it kind of hammered home everything for me that. Firstly, I absolutely just loved the sport, but secondly, it was just like if you perform your role within a wider team of 15 other or 14 other individuals, it's gonna more often than not equal that positive outcome, and that kind of feeling after that game for me, it would kind of, when you go through tough times, which I certainly did, moments like that really, I guess, keep you grounded or anchored in what I'm doing is right. What I'm doing is what I love, and I'm going to keep doing it as much as I possibly can.
So is that what does it mean to you to be a team player? And I think it's like you said, collective. I'm a huge fan of team sports. I mean, we've had, I talked to other athletes too, but the team sports always get me. I spent time, I mean, I'm nowhere near you, but like as a kid playing sports. But I think you start to learn like, hey, we can get in a rhythm when you do your bit, I do my bit, we play together, we can accomplish, a win. So curious, like when you look over your career and play in your position, and you played, obviously a very tough position. What do you feel it is to be a team player? And what do you tell your team or, people that you've worked with in rugby before about being a team player?
Yeah, I think it's your ability to park the own version of, park your personal success or your ego to one side, and understand that it's, professional sport is it's an outcome-based business. So it's, you win or you die by the fact that you're losing. So, whether you want to look good, if your personal success is something that's at the forefront of your mind, then I guarantee you it's not going to end well. So I think being able to park your own personal ambition, being able to park your own ego, and understand that it's about performing your role and the 14 other guys around you in a rugby sense performing their role. Once that occurs, and when it does occur, it sounds corny, but it's beautiful. Like that's what equals the success. That's what we talk about team culture. That's that fun moment you get when you've suffered for 4 or 5 months in a preseason, and then you're finally on the field. You perform your role, the other guys around you doing, and you get a win over a big team, or you get to lift a trophy. Like it's, you can get caught up in looking at, how do I play really well, or how do I earn more money, or how do I lift that trophy? Like realistically, it's as simple as knowing that there's a process involved in being good at your particular role, and then when it comes to forming your particular role, you have you've done the preparation that result will take care of itself, as long as you've put the hard work in and you're willing to do your individual role when it comes to a game or when it comes to a season.
Yeah, totally agree with that. It's being a team player, it's how you get the results, and then you feel so good when you get that result together as a team. And I'm just curious because I feel like at times the competitive fuel gets into me, when I work on something with my business. I feel like you're obviously a very competitive player as well, and probably competitive in what you do today. But what happens in your mind, like right before a big game, like this is the moment of truth. Like, what's your mindset? How do you approach that, like right before?
It's funny, I was actually thinking about this the other day. So my now girlfriend kind of asked what it's like to, she dated me after I played footy. So she was kind of like, how does, that looks so nerve-wracking going out and playing in front of, 40,000 or 50,000 people, whatever it might be. how did you prepare for that? What did it feel like? It's kind of like the best, worst feeling in the world. Like that's be like you're feeling where you're so excited, but you simultaneously want to vomit. So I think what kind of grounds you, or what always grounded me, and I certainly didn't get this right the whole time, but it's like, you've put in the hard work, you've thrown 150 passes each side by the time you're from 11 years old, you're now 22, or you've done a preseason, you've done the work in the gym, like all that work that you do, you're busting your ass, you're sweating, you're bleeding, whatever it might be. Like it's leading up to performing in a game. So, if anything, it's like that performance in the game should really be the enjoyable part of things. So I think when you understand that if it's not sitting on your shoulders, there's other guys around you. It's really as simple as you'll perform your specific role within the team, they'll perform theirs. And if you're good enough and everyone kind of sticks to script, and that's where coaches come in, if you stick to script and you go about performing what's asked of you, then that outcome, that's really the fun part. That's how I kind of took the nervousness or the anxiety around a big game or a big event, kind of humanize it in a way. It's not all about you. There's other guys with you. You just do your role and the rest will take care of itself.
That's cool. I like it. It's sort of like trust the process and trust
Exactly
everything
right.
that you put into it.
Yeah, 100%.
I like that a lot. Couple questions, now that you've moved on from rugby, you've retired, you've had a really cool and amazing career. What are you up to, and how do you feel like your background in rugby and your competitive mindset has transitioned you into your next chapter?
Yeah, it's a good question. I think now, obviously my role now, so I left footy, wasn't really sure where I would end up. And as we know, I landed at Cub, which is a private members club, kind of an entrepreneurial club for businesses to come together. And my idea behind joining something like Cub from one of the team members' standpoint was to really be around people that were successful at what they did. I think rugby, I was very fortunate to land at the club I did, the Brumbies. Everyone around me was very good at what they did, and it certainly rubs off on you. So, landing at Cub, I got that straight away. And I was lucky enough to meet my now boss, Matt, who, personally, culturally, professionally, I very much align with. So I took the opportunity to jump across to where I work now at Westbrook Capital. And so by definition, we're an investment services firm. So one side of the business, we run a wholesale contributory fund. So we lend money out of that. And then the other side of things, we develop property. So I think throughout playing, I studied something very slowly over 7 years, which is a business management degree. But I was always very interested in the financial services space, but happy to admit it, I didn't necessarily think I was intelligent enough to do it. But I think when you kind of reverse engineer it, it's very much just a sales role, and something that, sales roles in general, I don't have to tell you, it's very much your ability to network, build relationships with people. It's what I did at Cub. It's what I do now. The product I'm selling is just a financial one. Everyone needs money in their own kind of way. So I think I really enjoy selling a product that's incredibly beneficial. Kind of get that emotional satisfaction at the same time. The best way to describe us on the side of the business I work with would be, when the banks say no, we tend to say yes, which is good.
So that's where the competitive thing comes in. You're going to win one way or another, like, please.
Yeah, whether it's exactly right.
Very cool. Well, our audience is made up of a lot of business leaders, some people maybe entrepreneurs, but definitely, and maybe some technologists out there in our audience, but definitely a lot of people at different stages in their professional career, probably more business oriented. But what advice would you have for anyone who's looking to perform at a professional level like you have done in rugby?
Yeah, that's a very good question. I think probably be prepared to sacrifice a huge chunk of your life. I think I got told by my first ever agent in rugby that you're going to have to be pretty selfish in how you go about this. And at first, selfishness is seen as something that's, it's, taboo. I don't want to be a selfish person, but, to be, and I'm sure I don't have to say this to you, to be very successful at what you do, it comes at the, detriment of, relationships around you. Friends and family take a backward seat. If you're on that kind of, that journey towards achieving something great, then, you have to, there's a huge amount of sacrifice that comes with that. So, I was away from home I left school and left straight away. I've only lived in Sydney realistically as an adult for about 2-3 years. So, the people that I'm still friends with were still my friends when I was young, but, you don't have those relationships. You miss birthdays, you miss weddings, you miss all these sorts of things. So, if you want to achieve something great, you better be willing to have the majority, or at least 80% of your life, take a backward seat to that. So, I think a lot of people probably underestimate your ability to actually achieve fantastic things or great things in life if you're actually just willing to sacrifice one or two things that are, really getting in the way. So, without sounding incredibly cliched and corny, I think anything's possible if you're willing to wholeheartedly jump into it, or to sacrifice other parts of your life that might be directly affecting it, I guess.
Yeah, I think that makes a lot of sense. Everything, if you're going to have the commitment for that definitely makes a lot of sense. I know I did this women kind of roundtable thing, and we had younger women who were kind of coming into this mentorship thing with older women, I guess, than one, but like professional women. And then we had some younger people just starting out in their careers and asking us a kind of a panel format, some questions. And there was a really impressive woman CEO that was with me in that panel. And one of the younger people, I mean, nothing against age, but she just said something about like, well, how do you manage work-life balance? I mean, you've accomplished so much and you have this huge team and you have built this, amazing empire. And she was like, there is no balance. Like,
Yeah,
if I want this, like, if you want this, then it comes with, time and effort and commitment and all those things, like you just said, sacrifice. But if you're, and you don't have to have that. There's like no requirement that you achieve that. But if you want that, then you have to kind of accept the fact that it's going to come at a so-called price. And so I think that's a really good point. I think you're right. Like, if you want to get to that level, people need to be realistic about what they're able to commit. So I think that your point's well taken. That if you want to operate at the professional level like you have, then you've got to make some big sacrifices.
Absolutely.
But gosh, Michael, it was such an honor to speak to you. I have a ton of respect for what you've accomplished. It's really impressive. And I look forward to kind of watching where you go next, because I'm sure you're already successful, but continue to be successful in your next, moves as you go. But yeah, thank you for taking time.
Thanks, Dina. I appreciate you having me on.
Okay. All right. Thank you.
All right.